Life Cycles Part 2.
You have a couple.
And last time, what we tried to do is we try to find the meaning and the understanding behind the various life milestones. So last time we talked about like what does Judaism have to say about birth and pre-birth and what happens to the child. And very interesting stuff. And obviously the mitzvah that we conquered very significantly was the mitzvah of bris milah, of circumcision. And what's the meanings behind it, what's the ideas behind all those rituals. And what we found was that this mitzvah is in fact replete with meaning and symbolism. And in effect, it's a mitzvah that kind of encompasses the entire mission of Judaism. Basically, if you look at just this one mitzvah, that's why the Talmud could say about that mitzvah particularly that this one equals the rest of the Torah combined. Because it provides kind of a snapshot, an insight into everything, a window, if you will, into everything that the Torah really wants from us. So that's where the child is already 8 days old. So it's interesting that at a time where the child is literally a week old, we already have a grand vision. And like the blessing that we say at, there's two blessings actually that are said at, more particularly, precisely, there's four blessings, that are said at a bris milah, at a circumcision. One of them is Borei Peri Gafa, the blessing is said on wine. One of them is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haMashiach Tzivanu al Hamilah, the blessing to do the bris milah. And then there's two other very interesting blessings that we only say at one ceremony, and that is Asher Lachniso Bivriso Shel Avraham Avinu, to enter the child into the covenant of Abraham, our forefather. And I think this kind of is indicative of a lot of different milestones in Judaism, where we're taking a child and we're integrating him into something grand. I think that'll be part of the theme that we'll see today. You know, a child that at 8 days, we're already saying that the blessing we're saying is that we're entering him into something, into a pact, into an agreement, into a fraternity that was already 3,800 years old. Abraham, we're invoking Abraham, 3,300 years old. So I think, and as we progress with the milestones, we see more and more the child's being integrated into something much bigger. And it's beyond the scope of his life and his parents and his family and his community. It's 3,800 years of history, of accomplishments, of tradition. So that's a child at 8 days. That's where we ended off last time.
Say it's because a child has been served one Sabbath. I've heard a rabbi say to me that they chose.
That's why 8 days.
On the 8 days because the child has to serve one Sabbath as a Jewish child. Not so much for health reasons. I mean, for Jewish reasons.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about you pointed out the health reasons.
Well, I wasn't even getting on that point. That must be something God knew. But one of the rabbis had mentioned to me it's because he compared life cycle of 7.
Yeah, so we mentioned that last week that there's 7 plus 1. We mentioned that briefly. That 7 corresponds to a cycle. You know, where we find it many times in Jewish practice, where 7 is like a complete cycle, and 1 more than that is kind of supernatural, and that would be the same idea. That's what we have. Let's say the Sheva Brachot, the 7 days of celebration after a wedding. It's also it signifies a certain measure of completion. Yeah, absolutely. But what was I going to say?
You were going on.
I was going on
7 days.
Beyond 7 days.
Health.
So what's interesting is that it's been proven, and the Jewish people have been saying it for years, but it's been proven that the best day, the time where the blood kind of settles in the child, so the healthiest day for a child to have a circumcision, is on the 8th day. You know, in hospitals today, if people ask new parents, would you like your child to be circumcised? They do it in the hospital, 1 day or 2 days, whatever. But it's actually been proven that the best time, the most optimal time for a child to be circumcised is when the blood kind of settles, and that would be at 8 days.
I wonder if somebody told it to insurance companies.
Yeah, let me say it's not that significant of a medical procedure that really, with today's technology and advanced knowledge in medicine, it doesn't really make such a big difference. But in ancient times, they were doing this, and it was a very dangerous procedure, and when the Torah tells us to do it at 8 days, it's because 8 days is actually the optimal time to do it. That being said, there's a perspective that has been very popular in this area, but corresponding areas that, what came first? There's the argument, what came first? Did the physiology come first, that the child is most primed to have a circumcision at 8 days, and therefore God said, do the Brit Milah, do the circumcision in 8 days? Or is in fact the opposite is true? That God wanted, for whatever reasons, God wanted the 8th day to be the day of the circumcision, either like he observed one Shabbat, or because 8 is something, a number which is associated with certain meanings, and therefore children are most primed to have a circumcision on day 8. Anyone was with me? It's interesting, like milk and meat. So we know that Jewish law obviously forbids consumption of milk and meat together, but after someone consumes milk, and they could right away go to meat.
3 hours later.
Well, it depends. Well, no, that's for meat. For meat to milk. If we go from
meat to milk, it's 6 hours.
Well, there's certain kinds of cheeses. There are those who have a custom to wait even after cheese. But typically, if someone has a coffee, they can go right away to the steak. Right? Provided they don't have the actual taste in their mouth, they might have to wash out the mouth, maybe if you wait 15 minutes. But either way, you can go right away. As opposed to if someone has the steak, they don't have to wait some have a custom of 3 hours, some have a custom of 1 hour, some have a custom of 5 hours, 5.5 hours, 5 hours and 31 minutes, and 6 hours. That's basically all the customs.
Okay.
And they actually found out physiologically that there's a certain enzyme that is used to break down meat that would be a certain health vulnerability for someone to consume dairy after consumption of meat, as opposed to the other way around. So you could have your ice cream, and then that enzyme is not necessarily in effect, and then you can right away go to the consumption of the meat. I'm not,
That's interesting.
Yeah, but did that come first?
No.
Was it because the Almighty knew that the order of consuming meat and then dairy is unhealthy? That's why he said not to do it? Or the other way around? Because he said not to do it, therefore, physiologically, that's the way he set it up. That's the interesting, and it comes up with a lot of other areas of life. They say, they find out that, like circumcision prevents a lot of diseases. Right? Is that why the Almighty constructed us to do it? Or is because the Almighty instructed us to do it, therefore he said he's going to top it off by making it also have other benefits as well.
But he wanted it for covenant for all people.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Jewish
Yeah, but I think it's short-sighted to say that God wanted it for a covenant, but really God wanted it because of health reasons.
I don't know.
Anyhow, that's an idea.
Are you going to answer the question?
Well, I think that it's perspective. It's a perspective.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say for sure that it's one way or the other, but I think it's interesting when you find a lot of examples of things that are set up just right. Like all kosher animals, for example, all animals have 2 vital signs. You have to cut both vital signs, make them dead. All kosher animals have both vital signs on the throat, and all non-kosher animals have them split, one in the throat, one in the neck. Right? The idea being is that when you slaughter a kosher animal, it dies instantly. As opposed to when you slaughter a non-kosher animal, it takes the length of the throat and neck for it to die. Very interesting. Is God saying to us, we want to give animals a painless death, therefore only eat those kind of animals? Or is God saying these are the kosher animals, hence the way they're going to be set up is that it's going to be a more humane way to kill them? What came first? Right? But you see a lot of these things. There's certain, like obviously consumption of pork we know has, it's not a healthy thing. The pork eats schmutz. It eats dirt. It's the pig. It's what the pigs eat. You're going to eat that as well. Is that because it's not kosher, or because it's not healthy, therefore it's not kosher? I prescribe to the theory that the Almighty set up the world to work very well, hand in hand, with His instructions of how to use the world. It means the instructions came first, and that was the blueprint for the physiology. Interesting idea. Okay, so the child has a circumcision. What's next? Well, what's the next milestone? What's the next building block of a fine Jew? College fund. 529. Oh, so we mentioned last week the Pidyon Ben. We mentioned it last time. What else? After the Pidyon Ben, so the child's 30 days old. He has a Pidyon Ben. He has a bris milah. What else? He's got the Jewish name. He's got all that history of what happened to him, but what was prescribed for him in utero. Everything's fine and dandy. What's next?
Bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah. So most people think it's bar mitzvah.
Oh, but it is.
Now, we mentioned when we had the parenting class that the Talmud says something very interesting. The Talmud says that if a child, when the day the child learns how to speak, the father has to teach him something. What does he have to teach him? He has to teach him Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Morashat Kihilat Yaakov. It's a verse in Deuteronomy, which means Torah was instructed to us by Moses, and it is a heritage for the Jewish people. And if the parent does not teach that to the child, it's as if he buried them. Very strong statement. You have to teach it, and if you don't, it's as if you buried them. I think the lesson is like this. I think it's important for us to realize that with regards to milestones and stages in a person's growth, we cannot actually forget about what actually is going to contribute to the child's Jewish life. The Torah makes a tremendous effort on education.
Well, at 3 years old, the Orthodox start to send the children to get a religious education. They cut their ears, the payers.
The Absharon, yeah.
I mean, that's part of the Orthodox. Hasidic.
Well, Hasidic, yeah, that's a tradition.
It's a milestone, isn't it?
It's a tradition. I'll get to that. Yeah, that's good. Bring up the stuff. This is a open forum. Everyone is encouraged to contribute. But before a child turns 3, usually they learn how to talk. The first words that they have to be taught is about this verse. What does this verse say? Torah. We were given instructed Torah by Moses, and it's a heritage for the Jewish people. Once again, I think this is another stage of integration of child into a much bigger picture. We tell him about Moses. Moses lived 300 years ago. That's a long, long time ago. But Moses is not just the person. It's the idea. We're teaching the child that we got something special. We got a Torah. It was given to us by Moses. Moses was a VP. What does a VP mean? A verified prophet. Moses was someone that there were millions of people that witnessed him receiving prophecy. The entire Jewish people at the foot of Mount Sinai heard the prophecy, Moses, I'll come up to the mountain. And this incredible individual gave us a Torah that he received from the Almighty. And as a child is about to speak, right, a stage of his or her physiological development is a very important time to grab onto this opportunity to try to enter him or her into this idea. What does a child know about Moses or Torah? A child 2 or 3 years old, they don't know anything. The point is that we have to plant an idea and let it germinate, and let it percolate, and let it develop, and let it progress. And if we miss this opportunity, what happens if someone doesn't do this? They miss the opportunity, right? There's a certain stage, a certain milestone that's missing. And you cannot miss it. We cannot afford to miss milestones in Judaism. And the Talmud is so serious about it that it says as if you bury the child. There's a certain element, a certain building block of their progression, of their development, of their integration into Jewish life and Jewish practice, Jewish tradition, that's lacking. and that's something not to be taken lightly. And once again, we see that as the child is very young, right, we're thinking very big. Right? We're talking about a child who's being circumcised. We're putting him together with Abraham. A child's learning to speak. We're telling them about Moses. We're thinking very big, right? Go big or go home. Jews are driven. Jews think big. And it's, with our children, as a child is being developed, we're trying to once again open up their eyes to what it means to be Jewish.
A quick question. This quote from Deuteronomy.
Yes.
Is it supposed to be taught in Hebrew or English, Urdu, any other language?
I think it's the idea. It's the idea. I
So
teach my
language
children.
doesn't matter.
I teach my children the verse, Torah Tzivalanu Moshe, Morashat Kilat Yaakov. My kids know we have a song that we sing with my kids. But I also teach them about the idea. We had a guy, Moshe, or Moses, and he got to give us the Torah on Mount Sinai. And even though the kids know what that means, kids know what Torah is, he can't read Hebrew a little bit. There's direct recognition of the Hebrew alphabet. But it's the idea, and it's planting an idea. And you might not see the fruits of your labor till many, many years later. As with everything we were talking about parenting, you don't see the fruits of your efforts till many years later.
Kind of our motto from the parenting class, which we're thinking of Elsie at age 30.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
That's our new household motto.
No, and I saw that. I saw my grandfather writes in one of his. My grandfather is a master pedagogue, or pedagogue. I don't know how you pronounce that word. And he wrote in one of his letters that parenting is about what the perspective has to be is what the child is going to look like when they're 30. So yes, a small child, all they care about is toys, and all they care about is candy. It's all they care about. But we're implanting ideas into their unconscious and subconscious that will take time to develop, but we'll see the benefits. Okay, so as a child learns how to speak. Now we have the idea at 3 years old, there's a tradition. Now it's important to distinguish custom, tradition from law, from Talmud, from things that are more serious, things that are more binding. Like the bar mitzvah is a real thing. This custom, tradition of upturn is a few hundred years old. It's not to belittle.
You folks know what I'm talking about? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll share what it is. Basically what it is that if you see sometimes, I know with my kids, you see boys that have long hair that look like girls, because even if they're wearing blue, but it might not be blue enough or whatever. Oh, your daughter is so adorable. And because there was a tradition where, especially in Hasidic communities, so think of Eastern Europe, where they would let their children's hair, boys' hair grow long until the age of 3, and then they would give them the first haircut at the age of 3. My mother comes from a Hasidic background, so therefore we do observe this. Even though my dad comes from the most Lithuanian and German background, they're not into that stuff. It's a tradition that was pretty much isolated to Eastern Europe, so think about Poland, Russia, Hungary, and
I don't remember, but I was told that they didn't take me to have my haircut until I was about 3 years old.
exactly, that's it.
And nobody knew why, except for some reason my great-grandmother insisted. She
Yeah.
also didn't know why, but
It's tradition. Oh, so it's tradition.
Yeah, so
I
it's
just thought they were just lazy to take me to the stylist or something, or save some money or something.
So
Where did this tradition?
So this tradition is venerated in the Hasidic community. In my particular family, because I have this mixed background, therefore, I don't say I wait till the child's 3. I wait till the child's 2 and change, almost 3. I don't wait till the birthday. I wait till when it's convenient to make a party and they give the kid a haircut and give him some candy and whatnot. And the reason.
Was the proof of it? Why?
Well, the reason why, so there's a few reasons, because remember, we have a tradition. You can't necessarily nail down one reason why. It might be a composite or combination of a lot of reasons. We know a child at 3 is once again another stage of their development. They learn how to talk, recognition of letters. So therefore, part of the tradition was that you give the kid a haircut and you leave them payas. Some people have payas. I don't have payas, but some people have payas. Especially, like we said, in Eastern European Jews, like Hasidic communities, they have the payas. And that was the time where payas, as in the side locks. Using people's side locks.
Instead of
Curls.
putting your hair so neatly.
So some of them have them like this, these long twirly ones. I have cousins like that. Some of them have them curled behind their ears. I have kids like that. I don't have any of them myself. My dad doesn't have any. So once again, that's another custom. That's not a law. It doesn't say anywhere. The Torah only forbids shaving this area. But there's no positive command. In Deuteronomy it says not to shave. There's certain areas of your head not to shave. Those were pagan customs to shave their heads, or to do like that, to shave like this over here. So therefore there's certain areas where the Torah forbids shaving.
It's a big thing among the Mexicans now. I went into a Mexican barber shop here about 3 months ago. I had to get a quickie trim.
Yeah.
And all the Mexicans were getting shaved. Clear around here, except this hair.
Yeah. So
Well, it's the all soccer teams now in Brazil.
They'll have-
probably go straight to hell.
well, no, it's a Jewish thing, because the mitzvah was, the prohibition was to not be like the Gentiles, not be like the pagans of old would specifically shave this part. So that was like a mark of paganism. So the Torah forbade it.
Speaking of the customs, so Eastern European customs, the whole Hasidim black suit and the black coats, it's also custom. Big hats,
yeah. So
hats.
So the payas. So this is the era. It's called the payah. Payah in Hebrew. You may know it from one of the words in the Hatikva. Befa'ate Mizrach means the corners of the east. The payah, the word payah means corner. So this is the Torah calls this the corner of the hair. Therefore, it's called a payas, or payah. And the Hasidic communities have adopted a tradition that not only are we not going to cut this area, we're also going to leave a substantial amount of hair to demonstrate that we're not cutting it, we're actually leaving it. We're doing the opposite. It's there's no mitzvah. It's a custom.
It's a custom.
So it's.
But my question about other customs.
Yeah, I'll get to that. Okay. But therefore, this custom coincided very nicely with the 3 years where the child has a significant hair, and then you cut the rest of their hair, and then it kind of it's like when they receive their payas, so to speak. And like I said, it's a custom, and that's one of the reasons why. There's another reason why a child learns how to read. So therefore, it's kind of like a culmination of a child learning how to read, and they read the alphabet. There's another reason brought down for this custom, this several hundred-year-old custom, and that is that there's a mitzvah in the Torah, agricultural mitzvah in the Torah in Israel, that the first 3 years of a child of a fruit tree, you don't touch the fruits. It's called Erla. 3 years you don't touch the fruits. It's like sanctified, so to speak. And similarly, we know the children or humans are always compared to a tree. And the Torah says so. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, for example. That's a verse in the Torah that man is a tree of the field. And there's many correlations that there has to be roots. And a person, what we see externally is all about what we see internally. It's a reflection of what we see internally. And if someone doesn't have strong roots, well, then they get knocked down, right? If someone builds an edifice without a strong foundation, well, it's very likely that a wind will knock them off. So too, if someone builds a human, you want to build a human, you have to make sure there's strong foundations. Don't go too far ahead of yourself. Don't build too bombastic of a tree unless you have the roots to support it, etc., etc. So therefore, to parallel the Arla agricultural law, they modeled the upshare and haircut tradition after that. So those are the reasons given. Those are the various reasons given. Now, with regards to other customs, I think that it's born out of a resilience is probably the best word, or resistance to at least externally adopt modernity. What I mean by that is that the Hasidic garb, so they wear, some of them wear hats like that. And I think the reason why they started wearing those hats was because it was really cold in Russia where they lived. And even Russia today, you see people wearing those rabbit fur hats.
But
that's because it's cold.
Yeah, they wear it in the summer.
Oh,
you go to Borough Park and
yeah. So
how does it do it? Right?
Yeah. So and then I guess what happened was because that's what they all wore. And if I don't want to get too sidetracked with Hasidut, because I could give a whole class about what Hasidut is and what the roots were. It's very interesting. But part of the theory of Hasidut is the development of a community as a method of building Jewish vibrancy. In Judaism, as we all know, at least historically, it's all been about scholarship. And the scholars were revered, and the ignorants were, the ignoramuses weren't vilified, but they just
frowned
they were frowned upon. That wasn't valuable. In the Talmud, like the most insulting thing you could say about someone was "rake," it means empty. It was literally the most insulting thing that someone could be said about someone in Judaism, because that's what we value. That's what we're built upon. We're built upon a tradition of wisdom, of intelligence, of study, of passion for education. That's what Judaism had always been. And during the Dark Ages, in certain parts of Europe, where there was extreme poverty, extreme anti-Semitism, and there was indeed extreme, ignorance. And it was a very dark time obviously Judaism, Jewish history doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's always a reflection of what's happening surrounding them. But there was a very dark time for certain Jewish communities. And the Hasidic answer to this problem was to redirect a certain focus away from scholarship and towards prayer, towards community, towards singing, towards having prominence of a Rebbe, like the Hasidic Rebbe. The idea being is that you could be, a Polish peasant who barely knows how to read, and you went to work at the age of 7. You didn't have the opportunity to become a scholar, and you work really hard, but on Shabbos, you get dressed up like everyone else. There's a sense of community, and you go sit down by the tish. Tish means like the table, and you have the Rebbe, and he tells stories, and they sing, and they drink, and they eat potato kernel, and it's a certain element of community. It kept people Jewish.
So it's pragmatism.
Well, for sure it's pragmatism, but it kind of saved Jewry. If you look at the 19th century and what happened to Jewry in the 19th century was the worst century in probably since the first century. Since the destruction of the temples and the exile, it was terrible.
That
So
would
is
be
that-
another interesting class.
Because-
The history of Jewish people through the early what you're talking, you could more than likely get into a good conversation, but we're not at that.
Yeah,
But I'm just saying for ideas.
the 19th century
Well, go
saw a
ahead with
quarter
your
of a
cycle.
million Jews
I don't want to.
convert to Christianity. And those were the Jews who didn't have that sense of community. And, in retrospect, we could see that the Hasidic movement saved Jewry.
In Eastern
That's it.
Europe.
In Eastern Europe. Because they, what were you going to do? You're part of a community, and suddenly you say you want to shave off your beard and shave off your payas and adopt a non-Jewish name, and what are all your friends going to say? What's going to happen? You're going to miss out on the community aspect. So it kind of kept the Jews together, and this is what great Jewish leaders do. Great Jewish leaders understand. Great leaders everywhere understand the circumstances. The great book, Good to Great. It's right here, Good to Great, Jim Collins. It's one of the best business books. So where he highlights certain companies that are successful versus other ones that presented with similar market opportunities but were less successful. Good to Great, Jim Collins. Perennially on the bestseller list for business books. So one of the first things that he writes is that great companies, or he calls them visionary companies, are companies that are able to face the brutal facts. You have to know what you're in. Don't be delusional. Great Jewish leaders, great leaders everywhere, they cannot be delusional. If you know that there, has been a dip in attendance to synagogue, in engagement in Judaism, in Jewish excitement, Jewish vibrancy, Jewish participation, you have to come up with something. Now, that being said, it's always very dangerous because, like the Hasidic movement was innovative, and any innovation in Judaism is always going to have its detractors, always. And even the great ones like Hasidic, we look in retrospect, Hasidic movement saved a large majority of Polish, Russian, and Eastern European Jewry, Hungarian Jewry, but at its time it was the most controversial thing. And the great leaders of the time said they're not called Hasidim, they're called Hashudim, which means suspected, the ones that should be suspected. It says, and it was a huge battle. You read about it. Either way, back to your question. Sorry for getting too distracted. Back to your question. So I think that part of the fabric of the idea of Hasidism and the idea of Hasidic community is not deviating from the model of this community. So therefore, if it's in dress, if it's in speech, we know that even today there's hundreds of thousands of Hasidic Jews in America that their first language is Yiddish. Yiddish. Who speaks Yiddish now? Du kannst reden in Yiddish? Da?
Was?
Was?
Yeah.
Geschmack.
I'm
Du
the
kannst
first
gerade
generation
ein
of my
bisschen,
family who doesn't speak English.
right?
I've heard it.
I can speak a little Yiddish, but it's a dead language outside of Borough Park and Williamsburg and Kiryas Joel and all these places, and in Israel some places.
In Amherst, there's a place Massachusetts, where they put together a library for Yiddish.
Yeah, but it's a relic of the past. It has been. Outside because there's a resistance to deviate from what the community is based upon. And it's based upon a certain sense of community and a certain unyielding to external forces. And that's why it was successful, and that's why it saved, and that's why the tremendous storms that caused tremendous havoc in the 19th century didn't impact, or to a large extent didn't impact Hasidic communities, because they were shielded. They were built to resist that. And even today, you can say, why do you need the hat? You don't need the hat. And you don't need Yiddish, you know. You could study Torah in English as well, or in Hebrew as well. You know, it's words that, you know, the Almighty doesn't care. But that's what the community was based upon, and that's what worked for them very successfully. And that's why they maintained that.
So I'm sorry, is Chabad and Hasidic the same thing?
Yes, Chabad is one of the sects, what they're called sects, or Hasidic groups of Hasidism. Chabad is Russian, so it's a little bit different than the Polish, Hungarian groups. And Chabad is also a little bit different in their philosophy, their style and philosophy.
Later, Rabbi Schneerson, he was the head of Hasidism.
That's correct. Of the Chabad sect.
Yeah, when they
Lubavitcher?
Lubavitch and Chabad is the same thing.
Okay, it's the same thing. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so when they left en masse Eastern Europe for United States in early 1900s, right?
With the migration of I don't know the migration
No,
of...
the whole Lubavitch movement moved from Western Ukraine,
Yeah, 'cause
Poland, all the way to Brooklyn,
Yeah, and
skipped the Holocaust. Lucky for them.
yeah, so, and not so many of them did. Not so many. A lot of Hasidim died in the Holocaust. You know, they were built like in Israel. There's a major Hasidic movement called the Belz movement. They have these funny names. The names of their towns. One of them is called Satmar. Satmar is the biggest one, but it's why the reason it was called Satmar is because it was originated in a city called St. Mary's, of all names. St. Mary's, so they called Satmar. Satmar. Yes, some city, I don't know, somewhere. That was the origin of the. It's kind of funny that they would have like such a name like St. Mary's, but that was the name of the town. So they called Satmar, and there's a name of a town called Ger and Lubavitch and Belz and Vizhnitz and all these names of little towns where they had a Rebbe and they got really big and really popular. So they're still today. There's still hundreds of thousands of Jews like that. But Belz, for example, they were almost decimated in the Holocaust. But now, like 50, 60, 70 years later, they're as vibrant as any other groups. You know, tens of thousands and of adherents or members. And
So I think it was my mistake. I somehow equated the Lubavitch's movement with Hasidic movement, but apparently that is only a
well,
subset.
yes, it's a little
So,
bit different.
I thought that's what it,
It's a
what-
little
what
bit
it is, it's the
different
same.
because, as we mentioned, Hasidism was somewhat of a departure from the traditional view of wisdom as being at the forefront of Jewish life, while Lubavitch / Chabad, it's the same thing, they were the least, the least, or they made the least leap away.
So the least controversial.
Well,
To-
no, they're probably the
to
most
the-
controversial, but the least of a departure from the wisdom as being the focus. Like the word Chabad. Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, Vadat, which means Chachma means wisdom, Bina means insight, Dat means knowledge. I mean, the Chabad of Hasidic wisdom, Chabad is at the center of it. So Chabad is the least of a departure from the traditional perspective of Judaism of scholarship.
And they're all over the country, all over the world.
Yeah, and they also have the messianic fervor, which was somewhat of their undoing. They there's the fact that their Rebbe died and they haven't replaced him, and there's this, there's internal conflict amongst that group as to whether or not he's still alive. There's still the messianic sect or movement within Chabad.
20 years later.
They still think he's alive. I mean, they went awry, really. Some of them did. They think he's still alive. They think he might still Mashiach. They think he's greater than Moses. They think he's God. There's really some issues that they have to iron out amongst themselves.
They're now calling themselves a completed Jew.
Completed?
Jew, yes.
Yeah.
Because they accept Jesus.
No, forget about. Think about it this way. I'm saying there are those that have legitimately raised the question that, listen, there's some people within the Chabad movement that still claim that either the Rebbe who died in 1993 or 94 is still alive, or he's going to come back. And the problem is that we've actually had this before. Like, we've been down this road before, where there's been someone who was kind of special and valued and had lots of followers and then died. The followers who claimed he was Messiah, he died, and they said, oh no, he's actually coming back, or he's still alive, or whatever. So it's a dangerous precedent.
Well, was it also similar precedent? Was it the root of the schism between Sunni and Shia Islam, right?
Exactly, and it's very bad. It's very bad that the kind of the gem or the diamond of the Hasidic movements would have such a conflict, such turmoil internally, but also externally, where this is a group which is, right now I think it's stable, but is in great danger. If they don't move on from this Rebbe and they don't address the people within the movement that think he's alive or whatever they say, then there could be a problem down the road. Be a major problem. You have kids today that were born after the Rebbe died, never knew him, never met him, never saw him, and they still think about him as either being alive or being Messiah. I've had arguments with people like, people kind of lose their mind, because they were so sure. Lubavitch Hasidism has had a tradition from time immemorial that they would have 7 Rebbes, and the last one of them would be Mashiach, would be the Messiah.
Or would they consider Schneerson as a...
Yes, now Schneerson is the 7th Rebbe. His father-in-law was also Schneerson, was the previous Rebbe, because he married his cousin, whatever. He had no kids, okay? And there's debates, there's so much debate about this, but there are those that claim that he claimed upon himself to be Mashiach.
Before he died.
Or he didn't quell the chanting that they say, Yichi Adonai, or they sing the song Mashiach. They would sing it for him, and he would dance along or whatever. And it's ingrained within the movement, this idea that the 7th one's be Mashiach, and they're very messianically driven. And now he had no children, and it's been 20 years, and they haven't anointed a replacement, and we'll never do that.
How is it different from the 10th Imam of the Iranians? Also, Messiah, he is hidden somewhere, he will come and say...
How is it different than Jesus? I have no idea. And there are, to be fair, there are responsible voices within that community that are doing everything they can to try to straighten this out. Because if you look down the road, this can only go bad. And a Hasidic movement has to have a leader, has to have a Rebbe, and has to also not come up with these strange ideas. There are those people that think that he's alive and he's coming back and this and that. And he's greater than Moses. Don't lose what you built.
Christianity has come up with a substitution. You have a pope who is temporarily discharging duties of Messiah, right?
Well, we're really getting at it. We're really getting, that's the danger. Okay, so
I'm sorry I brought up with the payas.
it's okay. I'm very happy. So it went to Payas, then it went to the Hasidic, and then it went.
That's what I personally enjoy about the discussion.
It's good. It was.
On tangent, and it's really cool.
I like that because actually, it was a shorter class today than. Okay, let's continue. Okay. So let's continue. So we say a child at the age of when he learns how to speak, it's important to not lose that milestone. The Mishnah tells us there's other milestones before Bar Mitzvah. At the age of 5, to teach them Torah, to teach them the actual written Torah, right, the books of the Torah, because that's the time when the child learns how to read or can learn how to read, and it's a time where they are ripe for learning that. And then at the age of 10 to learn the Mishnah, age of 15 to learn the Talmud. Point being is that we cannot wake up when the child is 12 and a half years old and say, okay, your bar mitzvah is around the corner, now it's time to learn about Judaism. It has to be an ongoing process. It has to be literally from day one, from the bris, from 30 days, child learns how to speak, age of 3 maybe, if that's the custom, age of 5, right? To latch on to these opportunities and milestones, because if you miss it, you kind of miss the boat, you miss the train, and it's very hard to make that up. And I think that, when we talk about bar mitzvah, what does the word bar mitzvah mean?
Son of a commandment.
Well, it means son of a commandment, but it means someone who is responsible for commandments. And in Jewish law, we're told that someone who's bar mitzvah is now liable and obligated and responsible to be a Jew like an adult. And that means adoption of mitzvahs and adoption of responsibilities and moral obligations, and they're capable of ownership of land and of items, and they're an adult for all matters, and they're Jewish.
For all legal
matters,
and
yeah.
ecumenical matters, right?
Sorry, what was that word you said?
Ecumenical, religious.
Religious. Yes, you got to dumb it down for
Yeah,
me.
seriously.
Yeah.
What?
Drop the thesaurus. Sorry.
The words I was told that in the olden days, whenever they were, is that if a parent died, a father died, they're like first hand to a mother if their father died for some reason, because people didn't live as long in the older days, so that the child after bar mitzvah helps to.
Well, a traditional.
That's tradition. Okay, forget tradition. Let's go on with.
No, but it was true that for many years, at the age of 12 or 13 was the end of someone's Jewish education, but that was out of necessity, where they were going to eat and they had to join the farm. But historically, we view bar mitzvah as a beginning. Unfortunately, I think today it's actually the end. It's very unfortunate. And I think that perhaps the solution to it is how we have to reframe what bar mitzvah actually means. Bar mitzvah is not about the ceremony. It's not about the event and the gifts and the whatnot. Reading from the Torah. It's about as we mentioned earlier, it's another step of someone's introduction into a certain world. Now they're an adult. Now is when they start actualizing all that they learned previously. Parent has an obligation to teach a child. Parents have an obligation to teach a child at an age, about ideas about Moses and Moses of the Torah. At another age about mitzvahs. At the age of 5 to actually start teaching them about Torah and teach them about the law. And then at the age of 13 is kind of where the proverbial torch is passed on. Now you're doing this for your own. And I think that, in today, like I said, it's very unfortunate. Bar mitzvah typically marks the end. Not typically, obviously not. There's many, many exceptions. But for many Jews across America, the bar mitzvah is usually the end of their Jewish education. And I think that and we know when someone stops studying and stops being involved, stops being engaged in their Judaism, their risk of maintaining that and perpetuating that to their children and making that an integral part of their life is greatly diminished. So I think that maybe if we were to learn more about what bar mitzvah means, as being an introduction into into being a Jew and being a Jewish adult, and also take the steps to ensure that before the child's bar mitzvah, they're already engaged in active practice and engagement of Judaism, then that risk of bar mitzvah being the end point as opposed to the beginning point would be lessened.
Is there any commandment about a ceremony, or is that just a traditional thing?
Well, it's tradition that every time we have a milestone, we celebrate. The birth is a milestone, and there's certain blessings that we say. There's the bris, obviously, Pidyon Ben. There's certain blessings that we say. And there's a blessing that we say, a parent actually says. There's a blessing traditionally given to a parent at the time of the child's bar bat mitzvah. And what that actually means, it's kind of why you're washing your hands. It's ironic. It's washing your hands of the child's responsibility. Before a child is bar mitzvah, they're the responsibility of the dad, the parents. And as the child now kind of receives a torch and is on his own, the parent washes his hand. And the traditional blessing is said as, it's not said with the actual name of God, so it's like a half blessing, but it says Baruch shepatrani ma'oncho shel hazeh.
Say that again?
Baruch shepatrani ma'oncho shel hazeh, which means, I'll translate that, patrani, which means that I am obviated, or I'm no longer responsible for the sins of this one. The idea being is that a child before, there's a great debate whether a child before they are bar mitzvah is obligated in mitzvahs or not, obligated in Torah or not. There are those that say the child is obligated, it's just that they're actually not enforced. And there are those that say a child is not obligated at all. But there's also an opinion that says that that the parent is actually obligated in the child's mitzvahs. But either way, that would change when the child has to accept responsibility for their own actions at the age of bar mitzvah. So the parent washes their hands. They are no longer liable or responsible for the child's activities.
Well, that's something when he has talked about the fasting, for Yom Kippur, for instance. When a child is younger, the child might eliminate eating dessert for Yom Kippur. But as the child gets older, once they bar mitzvah, it's their choice now. Am I going to fast or not fast? Is that what
Yeah,
you're
but
talking
that's
about?
one example, Yom
Or if
Kippur.
I'm
But
active.
in traditionally, it was about all mitzvahs. It was about wearing tefillin. It was about studying Torah. It was about everything.
I thought
They're an adult. They're with regards to practice of mitzvahs. They're like everyone else.
you mentioned in the parenting class, though, that there was age 20 was when they were responsible for themselves.
Yeah. So the distinction between that is 20 versus 13 is that 13 is the age where they're responsible for their own actions vis-a-vis humans, human courts. For example, if you're 13 years old, you could engage in commerce. Right? If you're 12 or 11 or 10, then for you to actually have ownership on something, you can't just engage in commerce and have real ownership. You might have to have a steward over it, pulling up a trap, someone who's oversees it. Like, for example, in a case of where you have, it's like what we would have today. If you have orphans that receive an inheritance, the court appoints someone to oversee it for them because they don't want them to squander it away. But at the age of 13, they're adults. They can, own their own, own their own property and own their own objects and items and engage in commerce. But at the age of 13, that's how we view them. But as opposed to the 20 is when God starts judging people. Because 20 is when someone is actually mature. Maturation is very similar to the age that we give at 18 or 21 for certain things. And that's why at 20, the obligation to get married and have children. We know that there's a mitzvah. The first mitzvah in the Torah is to have children. So are we suggesting that the child at the age of 13 should start thinking about having children?
Oh, God forbid.
They certainly do.
That's a bad idea. Well,
Not necessarily children.
hormones are raging, yes, but that mitzvah kicks in at the age of 20. A mitzvah getting married, having children. So, yes, 20 is another milestone, and that's when God starts judging people, whatever that means. We don't even know what it means that God judges people and how he evaluates people. But that's also a milestone. But 13 is as well for us. So for us, for practical persons, for civil, for criminal, for law, that we as a court could engage with, 13 is a milestone for that as well. Yeah.
Is it different? Just being at your home for Shabbat that one evening, just the men were obligated to go study. So for a bar mitzvah, I know typically it's age 12 for girls. Why? And is it just some?
It's
why is it
because
totally different?
girls.
Are they obligated to continue to study too, and how?
Are they obligated at all? That's a question I just started thinking, because you always hear of the boys, that the boys were taken in to study in the Jewish learning schools where the girls didn't. And I can remember my grandmother saying that she wanted to learn. She hid in the closet while her brothers were learning.
So, a few questions here. So first of all, bar and bat mitzvah traditionally has been 12 for girls and 13 for boys, and that is due to the, girls hit puberty earlier, so the girls mature earlier, and that's well known and documented, and therefore their age of maturation is earlier, and that's why they're ready for their obligations earlier. And it's the same thing, boys and girls. The same thing happens to boys at 13, happens to girls at 12, and that is they are entering the fraternity of Judaism. They're now responsible for their own Judaism. And the parent has to make sure that before that point, the child is ready and primed, because otherwise, it's like sending off the kid to the, to the races or to the test without being prepared. The parent's job is to prepare the child to be ready for that point. But that will be 12 for girls and 13 for boys. And yes, after that, the girls need to learn as much as boys need to learn. That being said, there's as you pointed out, most of the yeshivas are for men. Not to say that there aren't yeshivas for women as well. There are. Typically, men have more of an emphasis on the more abstract parts of the law. Like 97% of all mathematics postgraduates are men. It's more of a manly thing to do. Some women do that as well, but typically, and women are more the practical. So, like practical halacha, women have a great emphasis on as more of the hands-on practical. That's will be the distinction. But either way, after bat mitzvah for a boy or a girl, their obligations kick in full gear. So that's moral obligations, mitzvah obligations, but perspective obligations. You're an adult Jewish male or female, and now you are you have to actualize all that you were taught and be you're part of a tradition. Your grandparents, everyone who's Jewish today has many generations of sacrifice to thank for that. If you're Jewish today, what it means is that your grandparents, wherever they were, name me a country where they were, they had to go through a lot to maintain their Judaism, to maintain the Jewish identity, to maintain the Jewish practice, and to teach that to their children. So I think that that's a perspective that a child has to really understand. What it means to be Jewish today. It means that there's generations, literally generations, hundreds of years of persecution, of pogroms, of blood libels, of restrictions on practice, restrictions on commerce, of being marginalized in every which way, socially, politically, economically, of expulsions, of inquisitions, that your grandparents and your antecedents went through for one reason. So you should be able to maintain your Jewish identity. So that is, I think it's a perspective that should be given to every bar mitzvah child, just what history, and not only history on the macro scale, but on your individual history, your parents and grandparents, what they all went through so you can maintain your Judaism. And so you can be openly Jewish. And you can be proud to be Jewish, and you can identify as a Jew. We take for granted what we have today in the United States. But just read history. Any history book on Jewish life in Europe, or even in the Arab countries, over the past 1,000 years, 1,500 years. It was one disaster to another.
Last century was called the century of death, because from 1900 to 2020, we have lost 187 million people.
Yeah, and as recent as there, but going back every 100 years, there was the Jews were not allowed to live in England for 500 years, 1,000 years. Switzerland, France, we were expelled from many times. Spain, obviously, Spain and Portugal, Inquisition, whatnot. Germany, thank you. We know what we went through with Germany. Czechoslovakia, every country. That the annals of Jewish history are just replete with episode after episode of, during the bubonic plague, there were more than 200 Jewish communities that were slaughtered because the Jews invented a potion to kill all of Europe. 200 communities. That's just one episode. It's insane what our grandparents endured because of their Judaism, and how they were. Any country you bring, there's examples. And I think it's important for a child to realize at the age of 13, this is your history. This is what it means to be Jewish. This is what your grandparents dedicated their lives for and gave up so much, sacrificed so much, so you should be able to experience your Judaism. And it
seemed funny, maybe, I don't know if I'm wrong, that we celebrated by this over-the-top, overindulgent party.
That's
Well,
because you
maybe
want to
not
keep
you.
up.
I
People do it
think-
because they want to keep up with the Jones. I certainly was not one of those people. I
I
feel
mean,
I
I'm a-
wasn't.
keep up with the
I'm a-
Goldbergs.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys do some crazy celebration?
No, I think that there is room for a celebration, but I think that the perspective has to be that it's a celebration because you're at the beginning of something, not the conclusion of it.
So,
Just like we celebrate marriages and we celebrate births, they're beginning of something.
so it's a very
And it's-
occurrence
and-
of bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. So do we view it as a celebration or as a test?
I think it's a
Which you
celebration.
need to pass, you know,
No, I think it's a
become
celebration.
full-fledged
It's a
member.
celebration, but it's a celebration at the beginning of the marathon, not the end.
But it has nothing, I thought bar mitzvah is the idea that you reach the point that you're able to be called up for the first time to say the blessing over the Torah, to say the blessing
Because
afterwards.
you're an adult
So
now.
that's what I thought.
Because
the
you're an
idea of
adult now.
Bar mitzvah was, forget the pomp and circumstances and leading other parts of a service, just having your name being called up by you or whoever is leading a service, Leslie, daughter of, so-and-so and so-and-so, that the idea of being called up, that is the bar mitzvah and saying
Well,
the
that
blessing
is
over the
that
Torah
is that is a
portion.
manifestation of the bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah is the bar mitzvah. You are now an adult. You're responsible for. You're a Jew like everyone else. As a result, you to be called to the Torah. You could lead a prayer service. You
That's
know,
like
you're
the
obligated
first
mitzvah.
time.
It's
Right.
that's a manifestation.
What do you mean
That's
by
a
manifestation?
it's a
I don't
symptom of.
A symptom?
It's not symptom. Symptom is a bad word. It's an outgrowth. It's an outgrowth of what it means to be a bar mitzvah.
Oh,
It's
so-
not the
so you
core
don't-
idea.
So you technically, according to Judaism, you don't have to.
You don't
say
have
you
to.
pray before, you have to.
No.
You're a bar mitzvah once you reach 13 and you have gained through the steps of going to from your parents growing up, and then you do some Talmud and Mishnah, and you reach 13. It's like he could give me a handshake. I could get a handshake. Congratulations, you're not bar mitzvah. But signifying as a Jewish person, you have the opportunity to be called and recognized to the Torah and say the blessing before, because Dan always says, or any rabbi, it's the first time he's going to now lead the blessing before and read it from the Torah.
I'll
and
tell
read
you.
it
I'll tell you
afterwards.
something very unpopular. Something very disturbing.
Okay,
You ready?
sure.
If someone doesn't have a bar mitzvah,
There's still bar mitzvah.
they're still bar mitzvah.
Why do they have adult bar mitzvah? I had one, and I read that, and I was just like, that was stupid, because I was already
No,
one.
well, because
It's different because I'm a convert.
And I didn't get the
Do
party
that.
from my
Yeah.
parents, because I was, 40 years old, so what was the
no,
point?
but I also think that the idea behind of adult bar mitzvah is to give people a ceremony, because most people don't know that. You think that it has to have a bar mitzvah, it's like that something happens. But also, I think it's a recognition of a certain entrance into a certain life mode. So if someone, let's say, has been an absentee Jew for a while, then it's a nice thing to make a recognition of the idea that they're now having a bar mitzvah. They're now once again entering a certain mode of lifestyle.
Of learning,
But-
perhaps?
A learning, of observing, of practicing, of perspective, of everything, of being Jewish, whatever that means to be Jewish, everything that entails. And I think it's a positive thing. But if someone doesn't quote unquote have a bar mitzvah, they're still bar mitzvah. Right? Bar mitzvah is a recognition of a certain reality, right? Okay.
Yeah, you just explained in a way that I was unfamiliar with.
Well,
And that's
awesome.
the same thing
That's why I
as a
came to
girl.
class.
Well, anyways, here I am. But then these say years later, was it 80 years old, where a man, if he wanted to talk about ceremonies, we talk about milestones before when we started, that at 80 years old, a man or woman, I suppose, at this day and age, is eligible for another quote.
I think
Is
that's just a
this-
creative way to get rich old Jews to donate to the UJA, probably.
So it has nothing to do with anything that was never.
Bar mitzvah means you're an adult. You're required to do mitzvahs. That's what it means. That's what it always has meant. And ceremonies are nice. And I think that if we could add more ceremonies, is wonderful. And if that helps people be more involved in Judaism, then wonderful. But there's no source. There hasn't been a tradition for more than 50 years to have 80 or 83 or 73 or anything
Or
like that.
maybe at that point you might have a grandchild who's coming of age and you can share in the.
Maybe. I think it's a nice thing. These are all nice
blessings.
things. These are all wonderful things, but it's not substantive. Right?
It's like Valentine's Day, invention of the marketing industry.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just want to just dial back a little bit to your discussion of all of the obstacles and the genocide with respect to being a Jew and educating a child about that. It seems to me that's a sort of a two-edged sword in the sense that even though there's not a genocide, even though we, at least in the United States, can freely practice Judaism, I don't think anybody would say it's easy to be a Jew. It's a lot easier to be a Christian or to be a non-believer, especially in Western society.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. I mean, this is a Christian country. I mean, let's just be straight with that. So you can play that up and you can talk to your child about that, but still the sparkly, easy way out, is Christianity. Mm-hmm. So how do you keep a child within the sort of Judaic fold, especially in America or something else like that, when it's just easier. There's anti-Semitism, it's not as blatant as it was, there's Jewish stereotypes. If people, how do you do that?
See, who doesn't love David's questions?
Well, that's a great
It's
question.
such a yeah. He asked he asked a very deep. Okay, so I think like this. I think that when I highlighted the fact that a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into making you Jewish, I think that's one part of really, like we said, teaching the child about the big picture and the history of Judaism. I think that's an effective method for someone, let's say, that wants to abandon Judaism, for example. If someone, God forbid, wants to abandon Judaism, and God forbid, convert to Christianity, right? Someone, let's say, wanted to do that. So, what would you tell them? What strategy would you employ to try to maybe convince them to at least explore the possibility of remaining faithful to their faith? So I think what you would do is you would tell them, listen, the fact that you're Jewish today is because of all the suffering that your grandparents went through. And you leaving that is really invalidating all their martyrdom. And that puts tremendous pressure on them to say, Jewish guilt, to say, listen, your grandparents gave up so much so you could be Jewish. Are you going to just throw that away without even examining the possibility of maybe there is something to it? Maybe Judaism is worth something. Maybe my grandparents weren't insane, and there really is some value in this way of life. So that's I think that would be the method you would use if someone wants to completely run away from Judaism. I think that with regards to the reality...
Yeah, I don't think it's more of a converting. I think it's more of just walking away from it in terms of... I don't think many Jews convert to Christianity. I think it's just walking away from religion.
dies a peaceful death.
Yes.
But I think that at the time, I think there is an element of crisis at a time of Bar Mitzvah. I think no one's going to deny that. If we deny that, we're actually denying the realities. And like great leaders, as in the book Good to Great, which I would highly recommend, by James C. Collins, we cannot lose sight of the fact that as a religion, we are going through tremendous crisis today in America. And I think that we could point to Bar Mitzvah as being a point of departure from Jews from Judaism. I think we can't deny that reality. Would anyone deny that reality?
I think people start getting older and they start getting involved with more kids too.
Well, that as well. But with kids today, typically, not obviously, there's so many exceptions, and for sure, but the overwhelming majority, we can safely say majority of children who go through Bar Mitzvah, that is the last Jewish or significant Jewish event that they're going to celebrate. Maybe they'll have, a Jewish wedding or a rabbi officiating or something. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe they'll wear a white kippah for the wedding. Right? That's about it. So I think that perhaps also a Bar Mitzvah is a time of crisis where it's important to kind of wake up the kid to say, make sure that you don't have this hostile attitude towards Judaism that a lot of kids have. A lot of negative. I know that you meet adults. A lot of them have had not necessarily had the best experiences, in Hebrew school or whatever. Right? It's a reality. We know this is true. I think it's also. I think there is potential for raising the fact of the sacrifices that were made so that he or she could maintain their Judaism. But yes, I wouldn't think that's the only method. And yes, it's much easier. Of course, it's much easier.
Do you think it's easier for Jews to assimilate into American society?
Of course,
and to continue to keep their Judaism, and for their kids to keep their Judaism?
I think it's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen unless they ensure that it happens. There's plenty of Jewish kids wearing kippahs in Harvard. That's a reality that didn't exist a few 100 years ago. It's possible. There's Jewish lawyers and observant Jews who wear kippahs and maintain all the Jewish law, and they're Jews like Jews that were 2,000 years ago, and they're still integrated in American Jewish life. And this is a reality that's brand new. It hasn't been around for so long. Doctors and lawyers and the people that are on the top of their field, and it's possible, and I think it is possible. But I think we cannot lose sight of the fact that with children who, especially reaching bar mitzvah, it's a time where we have to make at least the best effort possible to ensure that this is not the end of the Jewish involvement.
And I guess one way possibly, if it works out with some families, is to do mitzvah and do mitzvah as a family, as opposed to have the child join another group.
That would be an effective method, absolutely.
I can't say
And I
happened
think,
my way,
and I
but
think,
I
also think
personally.
that if we were to graph out the best possible way to do it, it would start from when the child's very young, 2 or 3 years old, and they would already be involved. And they wouldn't be wake up at 12 and a half and say, now it's time for your bar mitzvah lessons, where they're not involved at all. And it's just a little oasis of Judaism that they'll have over a life bereft of Judaism, unfortunately.
I think it would just be the family kind of living, breathing it, and walking the walk.
That,
And there you
yes.
go. It's ingrained.
Yes.
And also there's a sense of that we're a small number, but there's something special about us. So there's
There's pride there.
Pride.
I know what
So
it
yes,
is.
these are all tactics that I would use because in a time where we're in a situation where a Jewish child has been exposed to Judaism very minimally, you would want to impress upon them what I think the pride, what it means to be a Jew. You would teach them about Jewish accomplishments and Jewish values and Jewish, But also, I think that maybe I said perhaps the tactic of saying your grandparents gave up so much that you should be Jewish. Don't discard it without a serious consideration.
But what about the assimilated families where you have, one parent's that Jewish and one parent's that not, and to say to your child, your parents, your grandparents, I'm talking about in today's life,
Yeah.
you talk about assimilation and such, you don't have two-parent Jewish parents.
Listen, that's a reality.
I mean, yes.
The
but
Jewish-
But you can't say to
No,
your
everyone,
child,
it's not-
your grandparents, you can't say to your children, your grandparents gave up so much.
Children don't
If
have
one parent's Protestant, the other
Listen,
I'm saying.
listen.
so
That's
that
you're
statement is
describing. You're
You
describing.
mean generations have given up, not
I
maybe
said
you're
your
my
parents. When I say your parents, it's proverbial for your antecedents. But I also think that's the reality. Everyone's dealing with this today. Reality of the past 200 years of Jewish life has been that there are lots and lots of Jews that have one Jewish parent, one non-Jewish parent, and that's the reality that you have to deal with. And I think if we're going to be making the efforts in trying to rejuvenating Judaism and rejuvenating Jewish involvement in Judaism, we're going to have to come across with that reality, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with it, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Wrong person. I thought Dad was sitting there. Dad.
Okay, so that's the bar mitzvah. Okay, so I think that maybe the next stage we have adolescence, and we know that adolescence is a tumultuous time in a child's life. It's a time that's typically marked with rebellion to a certain extent. It's a time which is marked as well by seeking an identity. It's a time where the parenting of when the child was really young is going to come out to the world. So if the parents had a very warm, open relationship with the child at the age of 2, 3, 5, 6, that will probably be manifest when the child is 12, 15, 17. As opposed to if the parent was very strict, wasn't very open, didn't have a very positive relationship with a small child, then the child will typically rebel, won't be open with the parent. And, these years, the teenage years, are formative years in a child's development. They are presented with new challenges that they had not experienced as children. They're also presented with new opportunities. And in Jewish philosophy, we say that child at bar mitzvah, it's kind of the beginning of puberty, beginning of adolescence. That's a time where the child gets the Yetzer Tov, which means the positive inclination. You say, wait a minute. If you look at a 6-year-old, all they want to do is make their parents proud of them. You look at a 13, 15-year-old, all they want to do is do whatever despite the parents or do something against the parents. That's the reality. That's when they're rebelling. That's when they're adolescents. That's when they're going through a coming of age. And we view the Yetzer Tov as the capacity for someone to make decisions. That's what it is. A small child, they're impacted by their instinct. So if behaving and doing what's right, doing what the parents want is going to get them the most attention, well, that's what they'll do. And a child who reaches 12, 13, 15, they're going to do things which are antisocial. They're going to do things which get them negative attention. They're going to do things which seem to be against what would seem logical. And I think that in Jewish philosophy, we view this as the child being given his or her tools of life. And the tools of life that we're granted are the capacity to make decisions. And the capacity, when confronted with multiple factors, what's right, what feels good, what I want to do, what distinguishes myself, all these factors, we have to kind of organize them and systemize them and come to one coherent decision. And that is when the child is endowed with all these factors, and that obviously creates a certain tumult in their life and a challenge for the parents. And once again, this is a time where we start seeing the fruits of the investment that we made in our children at an early age. And also it's a time where the tremendous challenges of a child and of the parent are going to be centered. So that's adolescence. We have also, after that, I think we could talk about love for a little bit. I just recently encountered a certain part of the Torah that we have in Genesis chapter 24. The first time we hear the word love in the Torah. And I think it's significant because it's the first time we hear the word love, and maybe that is illustrative of what love actually is. All too often, when people get married out of love, they get divorced out of disdain. And what happened? Love, the love that they thought they had, or maybe they actually did have, dissipated. So, yesterday I was reading my kids part of the Genesis portion at the end of chapter 24. So we're talking about Isaac. Isaac is seeking a spouse. Abraham sends, I don't get too bogged down with the whole story, it could be an entire class on its own. Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to go find a spouse. Eventually he finds Rebekah, and he negotiates that Rebekah will come back to Israel with him. They go back to Israel, she falls off the camel, a whole story there. And the verse says it like this: And Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. He married Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. This is the first time it mentions loves in the Torah. And thus was Isaac consoled after his mother. So, the first thing that jumps out at us is that, Isaac's mother has been dead for some time now, Sarah. And 2 times in this verse, when we're talking about Isaac marrying Rebekah, his wife, we mention Isaac's mother. It's like the mother-in-law that you never met for Rebekah. What's so significant about Sarah vis-a-vis Rebekah that it's so integral for us to mention her twice in the verse that talks about Isaac marrying Rebekah?
That she wasn't forgotten.
Well, maybe, but yeah, well, she wasn't forgotten. But why specifically here? Why the link between Sarah and Rebecca? So the Midrash brought down by Rashi provides us with a tremendous insight. The Midrash says is that when Sarah lived, there were a few miracles that existed in her merit. One of the miracles was that when she would light candles on Friday night for Shabbat, the candles will not be extinguished till the following Friday. It was a miracle because this was her mitzvah. We know that lighting candles is a women's mitzvah. And therefore, in her merit, it would last the entire week. What happened? Sarah died, and the miracle ceased with her. Another miracle was that there was a certain sense of spirituality as manifested by a certain heavenly cloud that descended upon her tent because of her. And when she died, that disappeared as well. And the verse points out that Isaac brought Rebekah, his wife, into Sarah's tent. Meaning, Rebecca started filling Sarah's shoes. He married her. What happened when he married her? She lit candles Friday night. What happened to those candles? They also lasted to the following week. Hence, Isaac was consoled for his mother with Rebekah, because he recognized that Rebekah had the same qualities, the same characteristics, the same merits, the same righteousness that his mother Sarah had, because the same merit was granted to her. And right over here, right in the middle of all this discussion, we see that Isaac loved Rebekah. We have the marriage on one hand, we have the love on the other hand. So I use this as an insight as to how the Torah defines love. The Torah defines love as recognition of another person's qualities. When you recognize someone else's qualities, you'll love them. Isaac understood the qualities of his mother. He was there. He grew up with her. She died. There was a certain lacking that he felt. Now, he didn't have that kind of person in his life. He married Rebekah. Rebekah had the same exact qualities, right? Then he loved her because he recognized those qualities. And I think with regards to our own personal lives and, of course, with our children, it's very important for us to teach them about this idea. The idea being that love is more than stereotype. I know this is platitudinal. I know everyone knows this. Everyone says this. But I think it's also important for us to realize that the Torah has these ideas, and the Torah teaches them to us for a reason. People fall in love and then fall out of love. And divorce is so prevalent, unfortunately. And I think that as parents teaching children, but also as parents living their own lives, it's important for us when we talk about marriage, courtship, love, dating, all these parts of a person's life, it's important for us to keep in the focus of what is going to be a stabilization of a relationship, namely love, right? What's going to keep it going, and that is recognition of character. I'm sure every one of us has had this experience where we have a friend, a close friend, or maybe an acquaintance, and we see them getting involved in a relationship that we could see is toxic for them. I see nods. Everyone nod? Is there a nod from everyone here? Right? Because we have more of a perspective, right? That we're not infatuated. Right? We see someone who's infatuated, and they think they're in love, and then we could foresee with certainty what's going to be the result. And that's why the Torah tells us, listen, Isaac married Rebekah. He didn't quite love her yet. When did he love her? He loved her when he recognized her character. That's when he loved her. And I think that's a sobering attitude for us in our relationships, but also with our children. You want to teach them about love and about marriage and about courtship and about dating and all these things, and it's important for us to have this perspective. There's obviously more to talk about. We know that the marriage process, what marriage means, why we get married. So we have the marriage process is also viewed as another element of someone's Jewish milestones. even though we think of it as a relationship milestone. But indeed, we in Judaism, we view Adam and Eve as being two elements of one whole. If you read the book of Genesis, just right at the beginning, you'll notice Adam was created more than once. And you'll notice that when it says that Adam was created, he was created male and female. Wait a minute. Adam, one individual, is male and female. How is that possible? So the Talmud in Tractate Subos breaks it down for us by telling us that the Almighty originally created Adam as a single individual, composed of masculine and feminine elements. And then subsequently was separated as to two distinct entities that are to be reunited as one. So this is like the overarching theme with everything the Torah says about marriage. The Torah says, for example, therefore, this is in Genesis, I think it's chapter 1 or 2 or 3 or something, right at the beginning. Therefore, man shall leave his father and his mother, he shall cleave to his wife, and there shall be one flesh. The idea of two individuals, two different identities, uniting into one, being one flesh, taking two and making them one. Once again, it sounds platitudinal, and it is, because that's what the Torah tells us about it, and that's the attitude that we have to adopt if we want our marriages to be successful. Adam and Eve are part of the ceremony of a Jewish marriage. The blessings that we say at a Jewish marriage. We say, delight, I'll translate it, I'll do the translation. Delight this husband and wife, just as you were praying to God, just as you delighted Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden together, and in yesteryear. And we put Adam and Eve on a pedestal of the prototype of a marriage. And even though Adam and Eve, they had their share of issues. This is just read Genesis. They had their issues. They had their arguments, had disagreements. But there was a certain element of the marriage of Adam and Eve that is so crucial for us to model our marriages after. What happened with Adam and Eve? They were one, they were separated into two. Right? Adam said, this time, this is a bone from my bone. This is a flesh from my flesh. To this woman I will call Eve. Right? And then he married her. He had an attitude of Eve being a part of him. Physiologically, they were once one. They were separated into two. Now they're reunited as one. The attitude that we have to have in our own marriages is that we are united as one, and we're going to acclimate as best we can. Because the challenge of marriage is taking two identities and morphing them into one. Because that demands compromise. It demands us giving up a little bit of our own identity, of our own individuality, and morphing into a single identity, in a single perspective. Hence, we say Adam and Eve. Look at Adam and Eve. The prayers are Adam and Eve centric. The bride surrounding the groom tradition 7 times as a unification, as creating, molding or melding or fusing into a single identity. All those things are trying to teach us about what marriage is. And I think this perspective is the overarching perspective that we'll find in marriage and in the rituals of marriage. I want to finish everything here, so I'm going to quickly go through everything. That's all the stuff that I was going to say. One more thing I'll say about marriage. I think it's important for us to realize that there's one area of life that we cannot go alone, and that is marriage. I think if someone doesn't have faith, if someone doesn't believe, it doesn't feel like God's holding his hand, I don't know how you could get married, Because I believe, and someone might contest this, but I think that if not everyone, almost everyone at some point in their marriage is sure they made a mistake and sure they married the wrong one. Especially at the beginning of the marriage, because you see incompatibilities, you run into conflicts, and you think it's irreparable. And if you don't have the perspective of, listen, I did everything I can, I did my due diligence, I tried as best I can to make sure this is the right person for me, everything else is up to God, so to speak, that attitude, I think, will help withstand all the obstacles in developing, in acclimating towards this marriage. I think if someone tries to calculate on their own, the odds of marrying someone who is actually completely compatible with them, someone that they could last 50 years together through challenge. As we know, every life has challenge. I think that divorce is inevitable. Speaking about divorce is significantly frowned upon in Judaism. Obviously, we don't believe that divorce is not an option. But I would like to echo what the Talmud says about divorce. At the end of Tractate Gittin, the word Gittin means divorce documents, and it's a book talking all about the law and the practice and the ritual of Jewish divorce. And it's very important, if someone does unfortunately get divorced, it's important for them to actually have a Jewish divorce, because otherwise they're still married, and if they marry someone else, that's considered adultery, and those children may be invalidated from marrying. Children of second marriages may be invalidated from marrying Jews because they will be considered bastards, mamzerim in Jewish law, that according to the Torah cannot marry non-mamzerim. But the Talmud at the end of Tractate Gittin says that someone who divorces his first wife, even the Mizbeach, even the altar in the temple, cries. It's such a sad thing where a couple that seemed that they could have worked it out and seemed like they could have, mustered the courage to make it work, and they got divorced. It's a tremendously sad thing, especially the first wife, because they may have a hard time reclaiming that sense of bliss and harmony that's possible with the first wife. The Talmud in Psachim says that when a couple is remarried, second marriage for both husband and wife, there are actually 4 people in bed. That's what it says. There's 4 people in bed, because everyone takes their previous experiences with them. And there's certain baggage, emotional, physical, psychological baggage that you really can't shed. It's with you forever. So that's why it's important to make sure that our marriages work the first time, and to give maximum effort and investment in our marriage. And divorce is something that we should try to avoid. Parenting is the paramount responsibility of every parent. For more, see the class 10 Commandments of Parenting. What it means to be a parent. It's a class that we delivered here. I don't want to get to midlife. I think midlife is really when someone's goals and someone's really objective in life comes clear. The reason why people have midlife crises is because it's a crisis, because they come to think they kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they say, "What am I living for?" The most common question, the reason why people do things which seem to be out of character at midlife crisis, is because they're at a crisis. What's the crisis? The crisis is where they actually come to the point of the realization of, I'm living a life, I have only one opportunity, one chance to make sure that I accomplish something. What am I accomplishing? What am I living for? That's the common theme of midlife crisis. And in Judaism, we try to avoid that by saying, the first question you ask in Judaism is, what you're living for? What's the purpose? Well, we had 5 classes on this. What's the purpose of life? What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish on our brief stint on planet Earth? Dying. You're dying like a Jew. There's a lot to be said that we have a whole class about what it means to die. What's the definition of death? How do you prepare to die? The vidui, try to repent a day before you die, is a statement that we say in the Mishnah. The importance of being buried, not cremated, we mentioned that as well. The idea of death being temporary, resurrection, olam haba, the idea where man will once again be reunited with their body, their soul being reunited with their body, and the world being transitioned into the next phase is something that we mentioned as well in previous classes. But that's the ideas. Those are the ideas of I really kind of ran through at the end there because I wanted to finish on time. I like to finish at 11:31. And we will see you all on July 13th. Mitzvah Hashem, with the help of God. Wish me luck on my drive today.
Yeah.
What's the topic on the 13th?
I don't know. What should be the topic? You tell me, David.
I'll listen to whatever you have.
So whatever. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. You listed off several things.
Yes, we have several things that we have.
Whatever you want to do it in Rabbi is...
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. We'll figure it out by then.
And, so where are you driving to?
Well, tonight we're driving to New Orleans, then to Atlanta, then to Richmond, Virginia, then to New York. That's the plan, because it's like 5 or 6 hours per day of driving. That's probably the maximum the kids can handle. When I say kids, I really mean myself, with kids screaming.
Why did you, any particular reason you picked those spots? You
Well,
have
it's just
family along the
no,
way,
we got
or
nothing along the
you
way.
have a Jewish site you want to see? Or
We'll do a
things
little
that
bit
you-
of sightseeing, probably in each one of the places. And then, you know,
So you think that's your journey until the kids tell you?
that's the plan right now. So we'll see what
If you want
happens.
to go to New Orleans,